Yeah. So the problem there is that that this screen, the resolution is so big that I have to get to the center of this screen in order to make it work. Okay. So, do you mind just bringing me a water bottle? Because I think I'm gonna need it. All right. No, I already had coffee. So, and coffee's not good for your voice, according to uh, singers that I know. Yeah, so they say the worst thing that you can drink while you're giving a vocal performance is coffee. So they say water or tea only. Yeah, yeah, it's a vasoconstrictor, which is the opposite of what you would think for coffee, right? You would think it's a vasodilator because it like makes you wake up. No, no. It turns out the caffeine just affects a receptor that's in your brain that takes in I forget which compound, but it's a competitive inhibitor for a receptor in your brain that makes you sleepy. What? Yeah. So the tea doesn't have the same vasoconstrictive effects. No. For some reason, there's research on this, and it shows that the bio like the metabolism pathway for caffeine found in tea is not the same as metabolizing caffeine from coffee. These things I don't understand. Like that research is very early in elementary, but yes, it's a vasoconstrictor. So it makes your blood vessels shrink. So it actually restricts blood, yeah, blood flow. That's why it's really bad to drink coffee before you get like blood drawn or anything like that. And it also makes you a vaso. It also makes you urinate more, right? So it also dehydrates you that way. No, it's not. It's not bad this year. Next year, someone might declare it to be bad. That's the bad thing about. Yeah, like that's the bad thing about coffee is I feel like the research changes on it every year. Anyways, anyways. What? Yeah, I know it's not gonna stop me either. So I think at this point we are live. Uh, yeah, so that we are live and that people should be watching at this point. This means all of the stuff I just mentioned about coffee ended up on the live stream, which is great. This is fine. I think it's a good beginning. Yes. So without further ado, welcome everybody to the first DMV Petri Dish annual meeting. I'm Ulysses Santamaria. I am the founder and president of DMV Petri Dish. So thank you for joining us. I know the weather has been not the most amicable today. If only I could have had it yesterday when things were nice and sunny and 70 degrees, unless that was 2 days ago. And if that's the case, my time is even more warped. So, anyways, without further ado, I'll start the meeting and get moving on to the outline. So, as far as the outline goes, where I'm going to be covering essentially the origins of how DMV Petri Dish came into effect and some of our highlights of 2022. I will be discussing essentially my plans for improved branding or rebranding of Petri Dish going forward. This based off of my travels in networking and meeting other organizations in the area. Then I'll be introducing many of the things we have already working in the background for 2023, as well as some ideas to come down the road. And we'll have two sessions, one after the rebranding section and one after the ideas for 2023 section for suggestions and feedback. For those of you who are on YouTube watching it, make sure that you're logged in. That way you can leave commentary for the live stream, assuming I have that set up. I think it should be. If not, feel free to bombard my email at Ulysses, so ULISSES, at dmvpetridish.com. And lastly, I will be just kind of probing and proposing how I can get some more help and ways that you can benefit from helping us going forward. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road. So the origins of Petri Dish come, much to my dismay, and I have to give it some credit, to pandemic time. So remember, back on the backdrop of 2020, everything is closing out and people are forced to go home. Now, during that time, I happen to have had a hybrid setup from the very beginning. My background being that I work in clinical research, so there are things that I can't do. There are things that I can't do from home. However, there are some things that I can do from home. So what you see on the right-hand side of the slide is on the bottom. That's actually my home setup for the early days of the pandemic. That's my home setup for the early days of the pandemic. You can see that instead of giving me a laptop, they gave me an entire desktop, which is my normal work desktop. And I had to figure out a way to put that on my desk, make it work, and so on and so forth. I actually had to lug that thing to and from work. To and from work at NIH to make that work. On the left-hand side of that table is actually me working on my master's while I'm working from home as well. So if anyone is listening out there and they happen to know me from work, oh well, we all do it. On the top row of images, these are just some of the things that I was tinkering around with while I was essentially trapped at home. So a lot of repair. And in that case, this is a chair that I needed to reupholster. So I went ahead and did the entire DIY process for that, undid the upholstery, replaced the cushioning, so on and so forth. And this is just to give you an idea of what exactly was occupying my time during pandemic. So to give even more credence to that, here's some other things that I was doing while I was at home, doing some amateur woodworking. Over on the top side, that's a desk that I built, and these stands for computer towers that I was building as well. This is also just to showcase that I am doing stuff at home and I'm trying to create things. On the bottom row, these are my earliest kind of home experiments with trying to create things like electrified fake fingernails, so that
the online stream is showing the other screen. It's not showing the primary slide.
Oh, really? Okay, there we go. Is that better? No? Oh, that's not good.
It's like showing the other screen.
Oh, that's weird. It shouldn't. Give me one sec. Let me see what I can do about that. Let me stop sharing and let me restart. So maybe I will do entire screen instead of application window. So let's try that. And then people could hear me, correct? Okay, good. Let me see if that works any better. Does that work any better? Let me see. I should be sharing.
The screen showing the screen on that one right there, your laptop?
Actually it's showing the same thing the TV is, so that's probably a good thing. Yeah, okay, we're good. Showing
you sure? Okay. Give me one sec then. All right, give me one sec. Let me get this set back up. Okay, this is better? Good. All right, and we are back. So then yes. So then back to home tinkering. So once again, this is me tinkering at home. One of the things I was working on prior to Petri Dish, before that became the bulk of my time, was these electrified fake fingernails. I was very interested in watching people use their phone who are using fake fingernails and have to do a strange motion because the fingernails themselves don't actually conduct electricity. Then on the right hand side of the bottom row of images, you'll see this mold. These are bricks made from a mix of used coffee grounds and Portland cement. Once again, the main point of these slides is to show you that you can partly blame the pandemic for the formation of Petri dish and allowing my hyperactive brain to do stuff while at home. But the more important thing behind this time frame is that I'm working on these things at home and I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if anyone else is doing stuff like this. I wonder if there are others who are like me, just trying to tinker with stuff at home. And if they are around, where can I find them? And that quest settled me on finding the Rockville Science Center in Rockville, as well as the first group that would be in the formation of Petri dish, which was Capital Area Biospace, that runs their events at the Rockville Science Center Makerspace. So that's kind of the pathway of how I got started, per se. So at a event that I was doing, that I was attending at the Rockville Science Center Makerspace, there was a night for making agar art that you see in the middle of these images. And this is a event where you go ahead and take Petri dishes and you take some bacteria and then you streak these plates in an artistic fashion to make, well, art out of them that you can show people. Now, at this event, this kind of sets the motions for forming Petri dish, like officially. I met Mohammed, who's here in person with me today, and we met together at this event, and he told me about his group that he had made in Virginia, which he called Nova Sci-Fi Labs. And the setup over there is that it was more bio-oriented, that this was to be a space where you can try and work on biological things. And that piqued my interest because I'm a biological scientist and I have some ideas for biomedical type projects at that time. So we essentially made a Discord server so that we could try and keep in touch during the week. And while I picked the name, I didn't make the server. That belongs to a third gentleman. His name is Thomas, who is always with us in spirit. He's a grad student over at University of Maryland, College Park. So he comes in and out because PhD life is busy. But this is the first time DMV Petri dish gets introduced as a name. And you can see at the bottom image is the first message that was written in the server created by Thomas himself. So once again, this is kind of the formation, the genesis of Petri dish as an organization. As soon as we had this Discord server, this online meeting space built, we essentially started spamming it to anyone who would come to these events that we were hosting. As you can see with the image at the very top, this would be a piece of paper that I would bring to the meetups and like, hey, scan the QR code and join, so on and so forth. So, and that was in December of 2021. Since then, a lot has happened. The server was made. I didn't go ahead and do the nonprofit paperwork until about May of that year, getting it started, and then I didn't actually get that finished until August of 2022. So fast forward throughout 2022, and the amount of things that we've been able to do is just incredible. We've been able to do rapid expansion. When we first started, it was just a few of us. There was only about 3 of us attending over at the Rockville Science Center Makerspace in Rockville. And at most, we were getting about 4 people attending the events in Virginia from Nova Sci-Fi Labs. So, at the very genesis, is very little, about 5 to 6 people overall, starting in a makerspace, or in the Virginia case, a garage. And we've been able to expand to officially more than 100 people, if I'm using my online numbers, like of active people. And then if I want to use the numbers from, say, Meetup or any of these other places where we list our events, it's in the thousands in terms of people who can see our things online. Throughout this time, there's also more expansion in meeting other groups as well. So since then, we had done work with Hack DC in Northwest DC. We've done, we welcomed MoCo makers into the scene as well from Montgomery County. And then we had also made contact with Baltimore Underground Science Base in Baltimore. So that makes our region of activity and our region of influence, per se, from Northern Virginia all the way up to Baltimore City. Other highlights throughout that time, we had a very successful seminar series run from May to July about making bioplastics from cellulose, which you can see in the middle row of images on the left. Yeah, the middle row of images there. So those are some pictures from our bioplastic seminar series. The top row is just some other instruction that we have done. So there we have a series currently working for making a pH probe that was actually spun out of the bioplastic series. And then on the other top row image, this is a class for learning how to do CNC milling. And then one of the bigger highlights of the year was our participation in a global hackathon for biomedical research that was done by the Children's Tumor Foundation that we had participated in as a real coalition of 3 different meetup groups in the area. So this would be MoCo Makers, Capital Area Biospace, and Hack DC. The 3 of us, we all teamed together, of which you can see down in the bottom row of images on the left-hand side. That was the complete team at the very start. And through our participation, we actually won one of the grand prizes, which means we practically won the competition in that sense. And we beat out many other groups and a couple of university labs as well. So that was a really, really big achievement. And most of that congratulations can go to Matt of MoCo Makers for his excellent leadership in all of that, as well as many of the people who participated as well, such as Gabriel Alte, who was also one of the leads for the hackathon as well. And that really showed, I think, for us what the beginning of what the next, I guess, iteration or generation of Petri dish can go, about this multi-group, interconnected, and highly collaborative environment of people who, for lack of a better word, we're already in science and tech, but we want to do even more. And so we're applying our skills, and we're able to do incredible things such as this. So all of this is just to say that from such a simple origin comes a lot, and I'm very grateful for it. And the next couple of slides are just even more highlights, more of our highlight reel. So these are just various images from the meetups that we've had throughout the past year. I'm a big fan of what I call messy table photos at this point. I enjoy seeing what people are doing. I enjoy seeing the clutter on the desk, for lack of a better word. If you happen to be in the sciences, there's a breed of scientists who like to claim, if your bench isn't messy, then what are you doing, right? In some ways, I don't completely follow that philosophy, but while it's happening, it's fun to take photos of. So you can see on the top row, this is the Nova Sci-Fi Labs. This is an image from the garage prior to expansion of that space. In the middle there, this is just a typical scene at Capital Area Biospace in the Rockwell Science Center. It's very common to have a desk that's filled with a bunch of electronic components. Moving on from left to right, occasionally during these times we'll join in on kind of other virtual events in the area that have speakers, that just to throw in some variety. On the bottom row, just more highlights. This is myself over at Hack DC with our Microfab Monday group, who on their quest to figure out how to make semiconductors at home. Moving on left to right, we have a one-off, two-off night where we were trying to make biopolymers. So that's what you see in those beakers are things that were originally derived from materials like gelatin or cellulose, and then tried to harden a little bit so that it could maybe be more useful, possibly some sort of resin. And the third photo from the left, on the second row, this is one of the small startups that we help support. So this is a invention by one of our members named Cheryl. She is working on this storage device for auxiliary medical devices, so things like glasses, dentures, so on and so forth. And she'll attend our meetings as a place to have feedback and access the tools so that she can continue to fix her prototype or improve it. That way, when she takes it out onto the road for the next display, it's in working condition, and just to get some of our feedback about what it's looking like versus what it can look like. So we have that usage as well. And then the last photo is a snapshot from our algae project, which was our quest to try and create biodiesel from algae, which is still ongoing. And I take it because it's just a cool setup with the lights and the flasks, and it's very, it's very, for lack of a better word, like mad sciencey looking, but it's much more organized than that. I promise you. And then, of course, what are highlights and what is a highlight reel without the people involved? So we have a lot of people from around the area who are involved. You may see some regular faces here and there because, of course, every good group needs a core. But the important thing is that we are a big regional family, and that we have a lot of these groups that we've been very successful at bringing together and getting to know each other and being able to take on more than what anyone would ever believe, what one would consider a social meetup group or anything like that could ever possibly do. So it's been very, very nice to watch it all grow. It's immaculate, for lack of a better word. So with growth, of course, comes questions. And the main question that had been brought up, especially last fall, was, well, what's next? Where does this go next? And I was being asked this question probably on a weekly basis throughout November and December. So with that type of questioning in your ear, you can only expect some sort of existential crisis. So I went ahead and began looking and seeing, well, what exactly would be next. Just taking a little water break. So to begin about what's next, where are we now? So this very, very simple cartoon kind of shows the schematic of how things have turned out. You have myself. I don't consider myself as any form of top-down sort of structure. I'm very much a bottom-up type of structure, where I am more of a bedrock or more of a foundation, allowing each of the different groups that we've tried to connect and interconnect and bring together, each with their own distinct leadership and administrative structure. And this decentralized model has a lot of benefits because they're allowed to pursue their own initiatives as well as seek help from any of the other groups within the network. This way, we have a very natural way, a way that more or less ebbs and flows, but a natural way of moving in lockstep or being able to move distinctly, but in one big mass motion, more like a centipede or something like that. I'm trying to find a good metaphor. Maybe a jellyfish, right? A jellyfish as a collection of microorganisms that all just happen to move in the same direction. Maybe that's a better way of phrasing it. See, a Portuguese man of war. That's what we are. We are Portuguese. In this case, though, you want to be touched. You want to be touched by us. So if there's a Portuguese man of peace or a more Portuguese man of fellowship, If we find a novel jellyfish species, we're gonna try and be the first to jump on the name. That way we can have it there, and then I can use it as a real example next annual meeting, or who knows, 2 annual meetings from now. So that's kind of where we are right now. So one of the things of, I guess, of that journey of trying to figure out what's next is to try and figure out what was around in the area. So during the winter time, I had done a lot of legwork in meeting many other quote unquote bio and tech or biotech organizations in the area. This slide that you see here is essentially my summary, my schematic of many of the key players in the area, of those who would like to call themselves the DC biotech ecosystem, as they amicably call themselves. And I was exposed to this by a couple of our members who happen to already have biotech companies in their back pocket, of which, even then, if you're an individual, you don't really know these organizations exist. So just to give you a quick rundown of who these types of organizations are, there are some organizations that see themselves as regional in the center of this diagram. Places such as BioHealth Innovation, they're a nonprofit. They see themselves as a connector or a coordinator for many different organizations in the area. There's another one, they call themselves BioBuzz. They are a kind of a media, social networking, and event hosting space on the internet for other organizations to use their services to promote their things. Then also, as far as regional organizations go, the universities, they all feel as if they have a place in the greater region, mostly in the realm of licensing. So technologies that are developed at the labs, at their respective universities, and trying to recruit people from the area to take those ideas and then run with them and bring them to market. Same goes for the federal labs as well. There's places like NIH, NIST, the FDA, so on and so forth. These places also have their own schematics for trying to move technologies developed in their in-house places to move them out-house and into the greater world. On the Maryland side and on the Virginia side, there exist these other organizations such as trade associations, much like Maryland Tech Council or Virginia Bio, and they involve themselves in doing things such as political advocacy, workforce development, networking, or even trying to get discounts off of supplies for their members. And then lastly, the piece is more on the monetary side. So over here, there are probably venture capitalist groups. I haven't met any of them yet. But in the meantime, who I have met were these economic development corporations, as they're called, or economic development agencies. So on the developmental corporation side, these are state-sanctioned corporations, normally on the Maryland side, that are chartered and funded by the state in order to give that money out and then fund other organizations with it. The local economic development agencies are very similar. It's just that they did not spin out. They're just within the same government entity. Now, if everything that what I've just said seems foreign to you, that's fine. I didn't know most of these organizations even existed up until just a couple months ago. So it just so happens that I just really leaned into it very heavily over the past couple months, as I've been kind of back and forth on going to a bunch of networking events and events hosted by these various organizations in the area. Now, why do I bring it up is because most of us, as I mentioned, may not have any clue that these things exist. There seems to be some sort of barrier to entry or a visibility barrier for the types of people who have found Petri dish so far and this greater system. Because if you ask them, they would say, yeah, no, of course we're here to help people and develop and take their ideas and bring them to life, which is fine and dandy, but most of us don't know who they are. And the people who have kind of joined the Petri dish network range from a pretty diverse set. So we have those of us who already work at bio and tech companies in the area, I have examples here for each one. So Mohammed, who works at a biotech company in Gaithersburg. There's Gabriel as well, who works at a machine learning company that does stuff with uh, pharmaceutical companies. You have federal lab workers such as myself. I come out of NIH. I listed Nathan. Nathan is a gentleman who comes from NIST. We have very small biotechs who, there's one that I met in Colombia. They're called Bluenix. And they had no idea that any of this stuff existed. And I gave the story earlier about Cheryl, who's one of our members who comes to us for advice because either this wider environment has barriers that makes it hard for her to get the advice that she needs, or maybe she's not aware of everything that's offered. Then we have what I call the traditional maker population, those that hang out at maker spaces, such as Matt, who is a long timer in this area and very influential, at least in this area, for it. And then Tim, who I is like I would call him a very exemplary example of someone who started in a makerspace and then is able to take his stuff out of that makerspace and then put it into market, who is a pretty successful inventor in his own right and has multiple products that he was able to commercialize through crowdsourcing and crowdfunding. So then lastly, we have the science and tech enthusiasts. So these are people who may not work in the sciences or may not be, or technology, or may not be completely involved, but they have been affected in some way and they want to be with people who work in that environment. So they come to our events, they want to learn things, but they may not have the capacity to do it in other ways, like enrolling in a university or being able to get employment in the area, in that area. So the main difference as to why it seems that we never really interface with these other organizations is because of the focus. They, as far as my analysis goes, they seem to be more focused on organizations, people who have already incorporated, people who already have boards, people who are already seeking or have already obtained funding in other ways. Meanwhile, on the other hand, we are individuals primarily. Some of us may operate as organizations in our own right, but most of the legwork is done by one or two people at most. So I think that tends to be the big distinction: organizations, individuals. So organizations up top, individuals, us below. Now, why this ends up being the case, I'm not exactly too sure. However, in my understanding and my interactions with people from this space, there seems to be some sort of disconnect with either the terminology that we're using or the ideas that they may already come with. So on the screen you see here, these are just some of the commentary that I've gotten back when I've talked to some of the organizations in the orange section up here. Things about safety concerns, things about not knowing exactly what things mean. Other terms to describe us maybe don't sound so professionalized, or maybe just people jumping to worst case conclusions just because they may not know. So while I'm not the biggest fan of playing with semantics, I understand that this is going to be an issue going forward once I start trying to obtain money through other directions to help keep us funded as we go forward. So one of the things that I feel like I've had to do in the background is try and develop a new semantic or a new terminology for the types of people that we are, essentially. So I currently am working on this, and this is going to be open for feedback, but it's essentially rewording us to slightly different nomenclature. That way it ends up being a little bit more professionalized, but also makes it more understandable for what exactly we do and what exactly we are. So, your traditional makers, I have them shift to micro inventors. the DIY biologists, people who are trying to do experiments at home for commercial or non-commercial reasons, they become micro-investigators. Very small biotechs, and this is where this entire schema comes from, is from the very small biotech angle. They already have a real word defined by the Small Business Administration as micro-entrepreneurs. So then I pretty much built everything off of that to begin with. Science and tech enthusiasts, people who want to learn but don't want to enroll in anything more formal. They micro students, and then community teachers. In many cases, community teachers, people willing to do classes, do seminars, do hands-on activities for the public. They become micro professors. Now, once again, there's a lot of feedback that I could definitely use here, because they're a mouthful, but I think it gives the idea that yes, we do what we do for fun, but also all of us here, we have potential to do even more, which is, some of us have ambitions of starting our own companies. Some of us have ambitions of maybe doing something crowdsourced. Some of us have ambitions of possibly working in the field, but in a higher capacity that we're in, or so on and so forth. And that's where this really comes from. So then what I call all of this, going back to this original diagram between organizations and individuals, if they call themselves an ecosystem, I call us a microenvironment, where microenvironment is kind of borrowed from many places in biology. People usually know it from cancer research, or they know it from microbiome research, or so on and so forth. I'm just showing my scientific cards here. Is when I have something like this, I'm just borrowing from biology nomenclature. So who knows? There's probably a more catchy way of going about this, but the framework here is, yes, we do what we do for fun, but if given the right push, if given the right support structures, if given the right environment, for lack of a better word, most, or some, whatever, have the potential to do more. Companies, other nonprofits, so on and so forth, other big initiatives, and things that could be just beneficial for other people. You all have that ability. So right now, in practice, it doesn't really change that much. We're still back at this foundation and distributed network model that we have going right now. All of what I just said is mostly for my concern as far as getting money and funding down the line, but also I think just a shift in mindset is, don't about this idea for potentiality, that all of you have the potential to go and do more. So here is, I think, where we're going to take our first break in terms of suggestions. Go and get some drinks, some refreshments. If any of you guys have gotten hungry, if you leave out this room and then head over on your left side, there's a small kitchenette. There should be a bunch of boxes there full of food. And this also opens up the ability for me to take comments from the crowd. Yes?
You mentioned something about microbiology or microecology?
Microenvironment. So
Environment. And what my question is, can you quickly connect that environment with what you're saying? So kind of repeat what you said. What is the analogy? A quick analogy.
So the analogy being comes from ecology. So in ecology, these bigger players in the area, they call themselves an ecosystem because they also got the terminology from biology. An ecosystem is an environment where many large organisms roam together and contribute to a bigger natural scene, right? So your deer, your squirrels, your trees, your wolves, your coyotes, all of these form a forest ecosystem, right? Rivers and so on and so forth, right? A microenvironment is used to describe essentially the same thing, but on a much, much smaller scale. So let's just say, for example, I get it from the gut microenvironment, and this is a mixture of bacteria, human cells, and fungi that dwell, and viruses that dwell in our guts, in our small and large intestine, to make sure that we are operating properly. All right, but it's the same. It's a very similar concept. It's just at two different scales.
Right, it seems like those have borders or rails or something that doesn't let them die out. So you're saying build that at our level, right?
Yes.
Or something that potentially could take hold and kind of just, it could even more in the future, but
Yes.
it's a start as opposed to no rails.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I also think the Petri dish itself is the perfect analogy. You take a single bacterium in a Petri dish, and given the right things, it grows. And given the right kind of growth, it grows exponentially. And we've all heard that thing that, I forget, like 52 cycles or something is the size of the universe or something, if you're given enough feeder material. And all life systems and all business systems work the same way. If you have enough of the good stuff, you grow. And the question is, at these smaller scales, what is that good stuff, and what can we do? And I think that's the opportunity that I see with the Petri dish concept is, can we identify growth vehicles that target the single cell and target the single individual and the smaller things that get them to that point where they're operating from small fish to big fish. And I do think that's a very underserved market. I do think there's a lot we can do there. But I like the Petri dish analogy as well.
Excellent. Yes, Jake.
I like the name, the DMV Petri dish. I think it's kind of perfect. It encapsulates what you're trying to do. Like you said, give enough feeder material, it just grows. It allows them to do something new. So, I think speaking of that concept would be good. That's mine.
Excellent. Thank you.
The other thing, I guess, would be maybe observing as days go along, in months, I guess, what's working, what's not, maybe, or at least the assumption that's not working, right? And just keep the rails growing. I'm just saying, it's a subtlety, but obviously, I don't know, someone needs to orchestrate that, I would imagine. A group, anyway. That's it.
Go ahead, Ben.
Does switching from the DMV Petri dish just being like a host of these other organizations to us naming and categorizing each different person, does that transition us from being a sort of bottom-up platform to being a top-down organizational structure for all of the different members of the DMV Petri dish?
No, because because my goal is to not inhibit and take over other groups entirely. I want them to have their independence. I want them to have everything. It's more about support. It's more about giving them options and different tools and pathways that they can take to try and do more. So, Matt talked about trying to have the right support environment, and Luis is talking about the same rails. So you'll see it in slides coming up, but just to give a sneak peek, there are things that we're working on behind the scenes, such as trying to put together some sort of toolkit or framework that people can use to be able to follow up on their own personal projects to a much better degree, because a lot of people in our realm have an issue with being able to keep up with their own work, because how many of us really know about project management or project development principles? The truth is, not really. We're relying on ourselves to stay on top of ourselves. But if you have just something even as simple as a checklist, right, that you can grab from us, or be walked through about, hey, these are best practices for keeping yourself in check, having goals for yourself, these sorts of things, that could be very beneficial, right? Or other concepts we have coming down the line, such as larger scale community programs, so that community projects, so that people can either practice skills that they're learning, or be able to contribute to something greater, or work on something in the meantime while they're trying to come up with their next best thing, these sorts of things. So I don't want to take over groups. I want groups to maintain their own identity, their own focuses, their own character, but be able to provide them with additional things that take them to the next level.
Have we considered
Such as?
Like, we have a DMV Petri dish YouTube channel, perhaps. Each one like contributes a video. Maybe over, I'm sure over the last year, there have been some projects that have had that sequential continuity that you mentioned, to a point where you could put together a polished 2-minute video. So when you go to these people, you meet these people who may invest or give you money to continue going, and they're like, you're having trouble communicating what it is you're working on. Pull up a 2-minute video that you produce.
Content generation, not exactly.
Wider,
Yeah. So I don't have that yet. Today's event is being live streamed on the YouTube channel I made for it. So possibly down the line, we'll need to recruit some media people for that. But or if anyone can DIY their own video, yeah, happy to put it up on a channel. Like this entire meeting for today will be essentially left on the channel because as a nonprofit, I have to have an annual meeting every year. Also, B, I have to have some record of it. So yeah, the YouTube channel I have it for today is here to stay.
One thing, just building on that, I do think there's an opportunity there. One thing that our hodgepodge, communities have in spades is sex appeal from all of the really interesting things we do: bioalgae, bioplastics, biomedical hackathons, building a transistor. All of these things are really cool. I mean, they have fundamental cool factor and wow factor, and as an aggregate across our different groups, we have a lot of them. We have a lot of them concurrently, and they have the multi-week and all that stuff. Now, no one entity is set up as a media house. No one of us has that big YouTube channel, but there is that opportunity there that if you had like a reporter who's part of these groups embedding themselves, it would be an opportunity to turn the organic process of the scientific process we're all going through into really good, juicy content. I mean, this stuff would do well on YouTube if it was packaged right, but we have to go into this eye wide open that none of us and none of the groups that you're jumping into are particularly doing that already.
So kind of building off of that, I think maybe a lower barrier to entry with that would be like a blog. And I think maybe building towards videos and higher production value stuff is good, but I was looking into how to get stuff on Google and show a bunch of search results and stuff, which I think is an important way to build an audience, right? And one of the biggest ways to have regular blog updates. Google loves that, so that's a great way to get the algorithm. So if you have that traveling journalist, which I think is a cool idea, DMV Petri staff that are posting little projects and stuff. They write a little blog post once a month. And, that might be a good way to start.
And there's a lot of overlap between content release and the kind of facilitation and orchestration you're trying to do. Because a lot of what you're trying to solve is make people more aware of resources, connect people, and you need fundamental audience for that. The fundamental audience that you have needs to be informed of relevant things.
Yeah.
So content generation is a vehicle both for growing the audience, but also giving useful communications out.
Yes, to the people who we already have. Yep.
Yeah. So there's a lot of positive feedback at that certain scale. Again, whenever we're ready for that, but we can walk, walk, run.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really good idea. There near the end, I do make a mention of something like that, something related to media, because in some ways I'm a Luddite, other ways I'm not. But yeah, with the social media stuff, I happen to be a Luddite in that sense. So the only place I currently do post outside of Discord is probably LinkedIn. And actually, you're right. I did have somebody, a couple of people reach out to me on LinkedIn for various things because of that posting.
It
So
might not be us because we're boring scientists or whatever, but there's somebody out there. I've seen people, for example, they'll manage your LinkedIn for you.
yeah,
And that's kind of, I would recommend that for you in your case because you're building a persona.
yeah,
But also, if you find the right people to do this regular blogging, then let them loose because these people, it just comes natural sometimes.
Yep.
If we find the right person.
William.
We can recruit a design marketing.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah.
That would take us on as a hobby project at least for a semester.
Yeah. So then, what do you call it? So like I said, if any of you guys are hungry for lunch or whatever, please like grab something and we'll happily go on intermission for a little bit if need be. So, Mohammed.
Couple comments. So I wanted to mention there's the DIY bio community, if you're familiar with it. Like, I actually tried to go on their website to figure out if there are any DIY bio communities around our area, because they have links to one of the DIY bio communities.
You talking about DIY Biosphere or the other one?
I think it is a DIY bio.
Yeah, so I tried reaching out to them too. I meant like I put in our stuff on submitted our information more than 6 months ago, and they never got back to me. I don't know how active they are. This is not included in this, but I'll mention it as oral history. You and I both know DIY Bio was pretty hot a few years ago, and then it's just not that hot anymore for for a reason I don't really understand. But I've reached out to them before. They're supposed to be sending monthly newsletters over at DIY Biosphere, and I haven't received a single thing from them since signing up about 6 to 8 months ago.
I was just mentioning that because when I was looking for communities to join,
Mhm.
before Nova Sci Fi, I was pulling up their website and I was looking for communities. So I think if we're a part of such an organization,
Mhm.
then more people can get to know about the idea.
Yes.
We can get to the other communities.
There is a successor organization to DIY Biosphere, and they're based out of MIT. So they call themselves I forget they call themselves like the Community Bio Summit. They do an annual meeting once a year. I dropped by for a little bit just to see what it's like. But yeah, they're mostly based out of MIT. A lot of those places that you saw on that website, they show up in this group as well, and they include spaces like Nova Sci-Fi Labs, but all over the world. So so I joined briefly for a little bit, but I haven't made too much contact with them. When I was in Seattle, yeah, I made contact with another group, but and then of course we have our friends over at Baltimore and our friends in New York at GenSpace.
I think there were like multiple different organizations. I know the organizations that you mentioned could be the ones that are focusing on larger organizations.
Yes.
But there are also some ones that specifically focus on individuals. And then not only that, like one of the individuals, some people are focusing on like a project that they want to turn into a startup. So, and some people are just focusing on a project as a hobby. They just want to build it because
Mhm.
they like the idea of it. So I think there's maybe a way that can distinguish between the projects that are trying to turn into like a startup and the projects that are just being worked for fun.
Yes.
That could help also identifying which organizations would help them or would help us in general.
Yeah.
I was
Ben.
in GenSpace over the weekend, this past weekend, and one of the things I saw that really paid off with them is they went really heavy on forging bonds with like existing corporate players, larger companies that were pre-established. We obviously very focused on that, we're more individual oriented, but I wonder if it would be improved to not take
Okay.
into forging bonds with more established.
So these sorts of things are going to have to come in time. GenSpace has the added benefit of over 10 years of history at this point. So just like us, they started on a more community level, and then once they had built up their reputation, they were able to talk more heavier with the corporate players. So I don't have it here as part of the main presentation, but I'll jump to it anyways. I do have these kind of like appendix slides in case this type of question came up. So like here in my ideation, these guys, they kind of come middle of the road in terms of like who we're going to be interacting with over time. And mostly because of the ease of collaboration. So when you have these more corporate players, depending on the company culture, they can be easy or difficult to work with in terms of collaboration. And of course, they would have more resources than we do. So yeah, I've thought about it, and I'm totally not opposed. As I joked with somebody else at some point, it's like, I have no problem being a sellout from day one, right? Like, but no, like there's a bit of for the larger amount of resources, there tends to be a bigger sense of gap or hurdle when it comes to actually working with them. In my personal experience, like universities tend to be some of the worst of them in terms of like obstruction to trying to work with them. Yeah. So that's what this chart here is for.
What inherently about university, what's the top of the list? Why do you say that? The top of the list.
So
It depends, I guess, to some degree.
many universities they have their own miniature worlds that they're trying to build. So they may have great resources there that are available, but they would only be available for, say, students and staff currently at the university itself. So, for example, right, the University of Maryland has 1, 2, 3. In the system, they have, I believe they have 5 makerspaces spread throughout all of their campuses. However, you cannot use them as a member of the public. You have to be enrolled as a student. So this is what I mean, like it's a big barrier to entry to try and work with them. And if you try to do these sorts of collaborations with them, sometimes they come with some strings attached, or they say yes, but it's more of a one-sided relationship. At the Rockville Science Center, we had this kind of that issue where they wanted to work with us for something, but the relationship was very one-sided about the benefits of working with them. So like in it, like we got space, but that's really about it. Any use of equipment or anything like that was off limits, only space, but we want you to recruit for our students in particular. That was the type of relationship they wanted to have with us, which I just don't, always find amicable. So, like I said, I think we can take a few minutes. What time is it? Oh, because I see you guys are eating, so we'll take a good, how about we take a good 5 to 10 minutes or so? 10 minutes, we'll make it 10 minutes.
Today,
Yes.
what is the rough format?
So the format for today, you kind of missed it, but it's presentation by me. This is kind of the first open space for suggestions, the feedback on some of the stuff that I'm presenting. And then I'm going to jump to the next section, which is about things that are already in motion for 2023. Things like new groups and new ideas and concepts for bigger scale stuff. And then once again, another